The podcast launch and listening party. My name is Lara Elin Oh. I'm a really old friend of Missy's. If you'd love me, she'll tell you someday how we met.
Wait, I can't tell them now.
Well, you guys decide, but this is
I think I should tell them now.
It's up to you.
I'm going to tell it really quickly because it's a special story. So I met Lara in 1998 when I moved in 96, but I met her in 98. And we were working at this building in West Hollywood. She worked upstairs from the newlywed game. I worked for a gay male porn company called Sidmore Shepherd. And I was head of their sales department. I was like really the only employee. But so I sold, it started out as basically wrestling videos, but then we started doing director's cuts. And it was a little bit hard for me because some of our talent, like I just feel really bad because some of them were kind of not, some of them were doing it for the, I don't know, some of them were like, I take them out to lunch and I'd say, you're doing this, you don't have to be doing this. And then, at the same time, I'm like, and how many videos you want some man scream with that? I was like really, it was really kind of challenging in that way. But anyway, so I met Lara and we would walk our dogs together and she was so sweet. She was from Chicago, I was from Detroit. And I thought, oh, she's just so sweet, she's so nice. And I thought, God, if she knew where I worked, she'd never want to be my friend. So she was like, where do you work? And I'm like, oh, well, we do like men's health and fitness videos. And that's what I told my family, of course, too. My dad's like, you got Ben Hur over there? And so it was very difficult. And so one day, though, Lara knocked on the door, and then she opened the door and she was like, hey, oh, men's health and fitness, huh? And I was like, that's it. She's going to dump me. She doesn't want to be my friend, but then it was okay.
I just think it's hilarious that she thought it was so
we've been very close friends ever since. Like, she's my oldest LA friend, so very. Anyway, I think it's a good story.
It's a great story. So anyway, so April and Missy have asked me to host today, so I'm going to be the mistress of ceremony.
Are you mistress of ceremony? Moderator, Sheela. Oh, yeah, you are Sheela. Yeah, Sheela.
I don't know. Anyway, so first we'd like to thank Juju. We have here the beautiful store, Anju. So for those of you who may be listening at home, please come check it out.
Please, it's in Highland Park, Avenue 56 and Figueroa. And it's upstairs, Suite 200. So definitely just so. Oh,
yeah. So just some general notes about the podcast for those of you who aren't familiar with it yet. It's been about 8 months in the making. They have 12 recordings in the can currently, but they did trash quite a few on their way to finding the 12 that made it to the can. They got new episodes every Sunday. And the idea came from Missy's love of women's history and trivia and of both April and Missy's desire to elevate women and women's stories. They joined forces with Dana Sullivan, their editor, who's not here yet. She'll be coming in, so when she does, introduce her and give her a proper applause. So the way it's going to work today, we're just going to listen to some clips that I picked, and then I'll sit and ask them questions that I've come up with. And I know Missy and April wanted to have questions from you guys as well, so we'll just kind of fill that out, and you're welcome to do questions at the end as well. We'll just kind of play it by ear. What SheelaNaGig is.
Yes.
The beginning of the clip. What is a SheelaNaGig?
What is a Sheela? Yeah, let's talk about it.
We wanted to start out telling you a little bit about what is a Sheela Na Gig. April, can you kind of delve into that for us?
Oh, sure. This really simple explanation about this rather large figure that is found on European buildings, ironically, a lot of churches. And why it's so ironic is because it not only shows female images, but specifically oversized female genitalia.
She said genitalia.
She did. She said genitalia because that's what
Sheela Na Gig
is all about. And you wouldn't think of that on your normal, typical church, but there it is all over Europe.
Yeah, it's true. They think they were carved between the 12th and 17th century. They're figurative carvings. They're actually carved into these buildings. And Ireland had the highest concentration of them. At this point, they have more than 100 of them, but so many of them have been destroyed.
That's a shame.
I know. And the reason being is that, people thought they were disgusting. At some point, people are like, why do these exist? These giant, these figures of these women with a giant vulva, and most of them were kind of haggy looking, and people were offended. They thought they were grotesque, disgusting.
And that's exactly why we're doing this podcast, because we take issue with that image or that distortion of that image, or not distortion, but dislike or criticism of that image.
Yes, it's true. I mean, again, they were initially thought as this grotesque image of like feminine evil, completely derogatory, the embodiment of lust and sin. And they were put up in churches as warnings almost, they think, that's what they used to think at least.
Well, I like to reinterpret it as, or we like to interpret it, because we've had a lot of these discussions, you and I, as feminine empowerment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so more recently, researchers have leaned toward the idea that the Sheela is a pre-Christian folk goddess, and her exaggerated vulva a sign of life-giving powers and fertility.
Ooh,
I know. So it's all about, embracing your power, embracing your femininity, celebrating your flesh.
Talk about your breasts and your uterus. Let's go.
Okay, April, calm down a little bit there.
All right, I'm a little excited about this. So anyway, tell us a little bit more about how this podcast evolved from breasts and uterus to a podcast.
Right. Well, I just want to say again, I think April and I are both very proud to be women. And, again, it goes back to that unapologetic female empowerment and sexuality. I read something, and it was something like, there's ever such thing as big dick energy. The SheelaNaGig is the embodiment of big vagina energy.
Woo, baby.
So that's what this podcast is about. Big vagina energy. Repeat after me. Big vagina energy.
All right, so there you go. There's the explanation of how this podcast came about with its name.
Yeah, if we could just say, the podcast itself, we don't necessarily talk about big vagina energy all the time, but we do celebrate women in history who often didn't get acknowledged or gotten credit for the remarkable and amazing things that they've accomplished. And so each episode, we celebrate what we call Sheela, living Sheela. And we focus on bringing her to light, letting her shine in her glory.
Okay, anything else? We go ahead and play. Okay, let's do it. All right, let's play from episode 8, Zelda Fitzgerald.
Remember Fitzgerald's second novel, The Beautiful and the Damned?
Yes.
That was his second novel, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first novel, we know that she was his muse.
Mm-hmm.
But probably he didn't quite have the access to her diaries at that point.
Oh, right.
Once they married, though, her diaries were fully at his disposal.
Are you telling me he lifted her diaries?
Well, as it turns out, Scott Fitzgerald lifted entire passages from Zelda's diaries.
Wow. This is scandalous.
I know. And I knew nothing of this.
Wow, me either.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I left off where Zelda was crazy.
I think most of us did.
Yeah, wow. This is blowing my mind.
I know. I think most of us did. And I think that was his intention.
Well,
I think his
really?
intention was to be to steal her, and she's crazy. Right?
Yeah.
It's so sad, the whole thing. And obviously it's not that cut and dry. There was a lot of
He did write
tumultuous things going on in their marriage.
Did she know that he was lifting work out of her
Well,
diaries?
I'll get there. Okay, Scott was set to publish The Beautiful and the Damned, and he asked Zelda to write a review of the book in the New York Tribune,
Yeah.
because she was actually writing some reviews at that point.
Right.
So in her scathing review,
Review.
Zelda detailed for the first time what had been going on since they had first met and first become an item. And this is to quote Zelda
Yes.
in her review here. It seems to me that on one page I recognized a portion of an old diary of mine which mysteriously disappeared shortly after my marriage, and also scraps of letters which, though considerably edited, sounded to me vaguely familiar. In fact, Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe that's how he spells his name, seemed to believe that plagiarism begins at home.
So I take it that review was never published?
No, it was published.
It was published.
It was published.
Wow.
I don't think anybody really thought anything of it.
Wow.
I think people swept it under the rug. He was the sensation. She was his, wackadoodle wife.
Right.
I don't know. And those comments did trigger many arguments. And, some people said she was lying. He never said anything.
He just didn't acknowledge
He just
it.
kept, yeah. Why he asked her to review it is confusing to me, but
is.
that's very odd.
But then, I guess maybe he expected her to support him in his work because he was writing for them, their
Right.
wealth, and
I don't know. Maybe they thought she wouldn't recognize her own writing. Who knows?
Or maybe he thought she wouldn't care.
But the thing about it is when Zelda began to receive requests to write books and articles, and she became more, she was writing reviews and she was writing short stories and she was starting to like kind of gain popularity.
Yeah.
And this made him very resentful and very jealous. Mm-hmm. So the idea that his muse was getting her own opportunities to tackle subjects that he wanted to use in his own novels, their relationship began to deteriorate more and more.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So she was finally released from that first hospital in September of 1931. Mm-hmm. And in an attempt to keep his wife out of the asylum, or so it seemed, Scott hired nurses and attendants to care for Zelda at all times. And, there were periods when her behavior was merely eccentric, and then there were periods when her behavior was full-blown nutsy cuckoo, mm-hmm. right? Sometimes becoming a danger to herself and others. One time she threw herself in front of a train.
Oh my goodness.
She attacked a woman visiting her house for no reason. And despite her precarious mental health, the couple did travel back to her hometown of Montgomery, where her father was dying. Mm-hmm. So she went back to visit her dad. Uh-huh. And they stayed until he died. And when her father died, her mental health again deteriorated, and she had another full-blown nervous breakdown.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so she relapsed, and at that point, they didn't go back to Europe, or she didn't go back to Europe. She went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, mm-hmm. and she would remain, though, in and out of sanitariums for the remainder of her life at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. But while she was hospitalized, she began working on a semi-autobiography, and it was a novel called Save Me the Waltz. And she decided, just for fun, to send a draft to Max Perkins, who was her husband's editor.
Oh,
mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So Fitzgerald, of course, when he found this out, Max was like, "This is pretty good. Why? Maybe you could edit it because it does need some editing, mm-hmm. and we can see what we can do with this." So he gladly said, "Oh, sure, I can do that." And instead, he lifted long passages from the book and used it in his own novel, Tender as the Night.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
This
is scandalous.
It's horrifying.
My gosh.
It's horrifying.
Wow.
I know. So Zelda was soon to publish that novel, but Fitzgerald was angered at this, as he had already used whole passages from Zelda's manuscript. And it was enough passages that plagiarism was very apparent.
Oh my goodness.
So he said, "You can't publish that book."
Wow.
No, I'm publishing my book.
Missy, I owe you an apology because I was really annoyed when I came here and you weren't ready, but this is amazing. No wonder you weren't ready. This is like
Thank you for saying that, April.
So a couple of things that struck me from this episode were Zelda's sense of humor. And in particular, this clip, when she's writing the review, again, I don't know why anyone asked her to write.
I know, right? That's so odd.
So odd.
Yeah.
And she writes, however he spells it,
Yeah.
referring to his name, as if she doesn't have the same name.
Yeah.
But like, it sounds to me like her humor was kind of a bit of power in a way, right? That she took whatever power she could find because she had her in the book.
Right.
And I was kind of astounded by that. And
Yes.
just, and I'm blanking on other examples right now, but she seemed to not be crazy bitter. She seemed to find dark humor.
Yeah. Oh,
The
dark
way
humor
she
for
was
sure.
treated.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. She was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
A brilliant woman. Yeah.
I guess hearing about this, so part of the reason why I wanted to play that clip was because of the dynamic between the two of you, right? Here is you're researching these women, and you're coming in. The idea basically is that Missy will research one, and then does this deep dive, and then talks through with April the research that she's done. And then the next episode is April doing the same thing. But your dynamic is at the surface, right? I mean, April apologized to you in your moment, right? But I guess the question is like, what is the emotional toll that it takes on the two of you to be listening to these stories? Because these are women that are forgotten. for a reason often, right? They've actively been pushed aside or put under, and that's going to be hard to hear over and over again. And so it was sweet and silly that April felt the need to apologize to you because you were so invested in this, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a lovely little moment of dynamic between the two of you. But I am curious about what the broader emotional cost is to both of you guys for researching these women.
It's getting real in here.
It's real.
Well, I think about our first one with Madam C.J. Walker, and Netflix did a story on her life, and a lot of it was untrue. Yes, and the stuff that was untrue was meant to be salacious and very kind of Hollywood oriented, because one of the things that they fabricated was the tension with a competitor. Originally, Madam C.J. Walker worked for this woman who developed these products, and then she wanted to join forces with her, and it didn't work out. And she went off, Annie Malone, and she went off on her own and she's the first, you don't know this, she was the first female millionaires. And if you don't know this, I think it's really relevant. She's African American, and had she been born a few months earlier, she would have been enslaved. So she was really coming up at a time where there was a lot of prejudice. It wasn't easy for women. It was impossible for Black women. She became the first female millionaires. And here they're telling a story that never happened about this ongoing feud and how Annie Malone's trying to take down Madam C.J. Walker, and that wasn't really the case. And so I was saying, and I'm sorry I'm getting off on a whole thing, but at one point in the podcast I'm going, why couldn't they just tell the fucking story? Because she empowered and trained hundreds of women of color, to gain financial independence and have not just income to survive, but really wealth. She taught all kinds of people. She was a huge philanthropist, and she was the neighbor of Rockefeller, and we all know who Rockefeller was. She had enough money to be his neighbor.
Yeah. And then I think by that same token, like when people are like, oh yeah, I saw you did Madam C.J. Walker. And may or may not have listened to it, but they immediately say like, oh yeah, I saw that on Netflix, and you're like, no, you don't know. That is a crock of shit. Like the whole Netflix. And it's interesting too, because her great-great-granddaughter, Alelia Beals, actually said, like, I love this quote. She said, I expected it to be like Hidden Figures, and really it was like watching The Housewives of Atlanta. And you know what I mean? Like what and she's actually working on her own script now, which is amazing, her great-granddaughter. So I really hope that she gets to make the real story. Yeah. So that's what we see a lot too, that even though these stories are told, they're not told realistically. They're not told accurately. Or they're turned into a made-for, Netflix movie that they have to add in a bunch of bullshit, But for me too, like I have to say, I am loving the research aspect. I just spent 10 hours straight on my last Sheela.
Just to give some context, we give our credits, where we found information. I usually have 5 or 6, not joking, 36.
I just get so excited. And I feel like it's that itch that hasn't been scratched since college. Like, I always love writing papers. But I get very like on a mission. I just feel like these women need to be seen. And there's so much out there, So it's like if I hear one thing, it's like I want to just explore that a little bit more. And I hear this thing, and I want to make sure that I'm addressing every little piece, But I have to say, like I do feel a little mad. Like as I'm doing, I do feel a little mad often. I'm thinking I feel mad.
So you need to go for a walk, clear your head.
No, because I can't move from the computer. Like I'm just completely like I don't even earn it to pee, Danny. I don't. No, but I just get so wrapped up in it. But I feel like I'm carrying like a torch.
Yeah.
I feel like this is necessary work. Like this is important work that somebody needs to do. And I'm delighted that it can be you and me. Like I am. I feel very called to this. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Should we call on our
next student? Yes.
All right, let's do Patsy Meg. Patsy Meg said, if to believe in freedom and equality is to be radical, then I am a radical. She was an American attorney and politician from Hawaii. She was a U.S. rep for 24 years as a Democrat. She was a first woman of color and first Asian American woman elected to Congress. Let's go ahead and listen to Patsy.
Well, we have an amazing Sheela, but before I get to her, I got to take a little back step. Because in 1984, I was working at a nonprofit women's career center in Pasadena. And it was a dynamic, amazing center that got started in the 70s when women started going back to work in droves. And a lot of people think that women went back to work in the 70s for like fulfillment or because they wanted to make their own money. And I'm not saying women didn't, but a huge push behind that big movement to work in the 70s was a skyrocketing divorce rate.
Including my parents.
Right.
Yeah.
That happened in the 70s.
Yep. And women were burning their bras.
Women were burning their bras, and they were also extremely limited in their career options. There was something called occupational segregation, where women were limited to certain roles, and most of those roles were very low paying. And so suddenly there were federal dollars to help women acclimate to the workforce and get their bearings, and there was something called gender equity. Because what they figured out in the 70s was that from the 50s and 60s and 70s on, in high school, boys got to take shop classes like automotive and woodworking and all this other stuff that actually translated to employment.
Yeah.
And decent paying employment.
Right.
And women at the same time, guess what they were getting?
Home ec!
Yes, they
we
were
were learning how to sew and cook. I remember
Sew and cook.
I learned how to make a perfect omelet in home ec.
Exactly. Yep. But it wasn't like culinary art, so you can cook for an army and make a good living. No, it was how to cook for your family.
How to cook for your man.
Your man.
How
Stand by your
to
man.
cook and sew for your man.
You got it. So here we go in the 70s, and women are poor. They are becoming single heads of households and having low per capita income.
It's just so sad. It's
really
so
sad.
fucked up. I mean,
I know.
Yeah. I
So-
mean, things are still a little fucked up with
Don't get me started, girlfriend. We're not doing that because we're focused on our Sheela for today.
You're right. I mean, we're not going there. I do have a little story about that, but I'll wait. Okay.
All right. So where I was in 1984 was working at Women at Work and providing career counseling for single head of household women and helping them expand their occupational horizons and income potential. And it turns out...
It's so cool that you were doing that.
Oh, I loved it. It was a great...
How long were you there for?
I was there for a total of 7 years. I started out as a career counselor, and I ended as the associate director. And
Oh my gosh!
It was
How old? You were young.
I wasn't that young. I was in my 30s.
Wow, that's so cool.
You know, it was an awesome organization, and interestingly enough, it stayed around for about 25 years. And most of those women's career centers that opened up in the 70s, they were gone by the 90s.
Really?
Because the funding dried up.
Ugh.
Somehow the general consensus was that women's employment issues were solved. Women were certainly representing 50% or higher of the workforce, but they were still at the bottom rung of earning potential.
And still are.
And there's still a gap, an earnings gap, and that's another podcast for another
It is
Sheela.
another podcast for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. But my hero is Patsy Mink, and I'd never heard of Patsy Mink until I started researching for this podcast.
Wow. Patsy Mink, like M-I-N-K.
M-I-N-K.
Like the animal, Patsy
Mink.
I like the name Patsy.
She was born Patsy Matsudo Takamoto, and she was born in Maui, Hawaii.
Oh, cool.
But she married Mr. Mink, who was a gemologist.
Okay.
But Patsy had a really interesting life, and she was very involved in the construction of Title IX. And Title IX was the funding source that led to my experience with the solo program at Women at Work.
Oh, cool. So it started with a woman.
It started with a group of women, Patsy being one of them, and a few good men also who helped craft this legislation. So Title IX was actually renamed the Patsy Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act upon her death in 2002 to commemorate not only her involvement in crafting the act, but also in strengthening it or attempting to not have it weakened, or after it was weakened, to kind of bring it back as different administrations let that act tank and wane and then come back into a more forceful influence, depending upon what era we're talking about.
Gotcha. So it was Title IX, but then after her death in 2002, it became known as the Patsy Mink Act.
Exactly.
Okay.
You're invested in their successes. April, can you explain what occupational segregation is? Because that was something, that was a term I was not familiar with before this podcast.
Yeah, so in the 1970s, women started really entering the workforce in droves. And while some of it was catapulted by the women's movement, because women wanted to have meaningful careers and meaningful lives, we also had skyrocketing divorce rates at that time, and a lot of women were forced to enter the workforce because they were becoming single heads of household, and they were low income. Single head of household by females were made up a lot of households that were impoverished. Occupational segregation were jobs that were really just restricted to women. Things like secretarial work, library, teaching, nursing. And the funny thing about teaching and library work and nursing even at the time was that those were high education, low paid jobs. So although women didn't have a lot of prospects in the workforce, they were segregated to these occupations. The ones that they tended to dominate had the least amount of money. And I was working for a women's career center that opened in the 70s, as these centers did at the time. And I had no idea that the program that I was funded under had been brought by Patty Minks. And when she died, they renamed the program for her. So when I came across her, it was very personal for me, and I was really excited to talk about it.
Also, we talked about, you mentioned Title IX in that episode.
Yeah.
And Title IX was something that I never really known it other than in the context of sports in universities.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit more about how much broader it was than just sports?
Yeah, Title IX also brought a lot of activities like shop for boys and sewing and home economics for females. And when Title IX came about, it was to correct that injustice, because boys were learning marketable skills that translated to the workforce and actually decent paying jobs. And women were gaining skills to be homemakers and not be able to earn a living. And so Title IX had a bunch of funded programs to create equity and opportunities for women to get career education and training, as well as create either equitable numbers of sports for females or to allow females into male sports. So it was a very broad-reaching act. And Patty Meeks didn't do it on her own. And there were a lot of people that were involved, but she was a Patsy, sorry. But she was really a very strong advocate and major player in that legislation.
Do you have anything else to say about Patsy Mink yourself? Yes?
I just think it was so interesting that, April's career path kind of led her to Patsy Mink.
Yeah.
That was really amazing. I was really excited. And yeah, I didn't know about her, so it was exciting to kind of add to the arsenal for sure.
Right, and she does have an incredible list of accomplishments, and April said, there's way more time that should be devoted just to listing the accomplishments. All right, so this next clip, you guys should be prepared for some uncomfortable giggles around bathroom.
One of my favorite products
Yes.
is Poopery.
Poopery. Who would have known?
Do you know what Poopery is?
That's the stuff you stick in the drawer and it's smelly.
Not exactly. It's actually called Poo, P-O-O, Puri.
Poopery.
Okay, so it's not like potpourri, like.
Oh, is that what I'm thinking of?
Yeah, it's like
Potpourri. Who
poop-pourri.
knew? What's poopery?
So I always carry it in my purse. I have some in my purse right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, say you're in a public place and you just have to, gonna make a poopy.
Use the restroom, yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And you're just gonna be so glad to have that little poopery with you.
Yeah.
And you just spray it into the toilet,
Okay.
and then it kind
So
of...
you don't embarrass yourself when you come out and stink everything up.
Oh my God, speaking of yesterday.
Yes.
I
What
was
happened?
I was at the credit union
Yeah.
in Pasadena.
Credit
You know
Union,
who
Pasadena.
you are. You know who you are. No, and it
Did
was...
somebody need some poopery?
Yeah, well, thank God I had it with me.
Oh, okay.
It was rough. It was a dude. He was like maybe in his 20s, and I saw the look of horror on his face as he kind of like came out and held the door open for me. Mm-hmm. I started gagging. That's how bad it was.
Well, I have a contradictory story in Pasadena, interestingly enough.
A poopy story?
Yeah, a poopy story. So I was working at a wonderful nonprofit organization called Women at Work. It was a women's career center. And there was one public restroom that everyone used. And I went in there and I stunk it up, and I came out and a woman was waiting to go in, and I was mortified, just what you were saying. I said, "I'm so sorry, it smells in there." And she looked at me like I was out of my mind. And she said, "Girl, that's what a bathroom's for." And that really stuck with me. And my husband could be a little weird about smelly bathrooms.
Girl, that's what a bathroom's for.
Come on, that is what if we can't do it there, where the heck are we supposed to do it?
It is true. That is really funny.
I chose this clip because I've known Missy for years, and I've always said she could sell hatchets. And I just, I don't know, you're selling poopery. I really think that you guys should ask them to sponsor your podcast.
But
We love Susie Becky.
yeah, the woman who invented it is a wonderful Sheela.
Yeah, and that's a whole other.
That's a whole other story, but she came from a lot, and she kind of given up on life basically, and then
Her life kind of stank.
yeah, her life stank, and her life stank big time, and then this was just like her final, like her last hurrah, and she invented poopery, and look at her now, she's a multi-millionaire. So yeah, even if poopery gets some. For sure.
But this is just, I picked this as an example of the two of them just having a blast, just rolling with it. And the podcasts deal with serious issues of women, just not getting their due. But it's not all heaven. It is joyful and funny and
try.
And it's adorable. And your rapport with each other just really shows through. All right. Unless you have anything else to say about poopery, I would like to move on to what I think is maybe one of the most interesting Sheilas.
Okay.
Roberta Cowell.
Roberta Cowell. Let's do it.
So this is what's interesting about him. So Dylan, that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he intentionally created a reputation of himself as a misogynist
Oh, interesting.
to prevent any woman from developing interest in him.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
He was more afraid of being, labeled a homosexual or asexual?
I think Roberta's I think it just ignited him. The fact that Roberta was out there living this life. I think he wished he could have done that. And he couldn't.
And he couldn't.
So he was able to, fly with her wings. The Erica Jong wings we refer to.
Right.
I think that was really empowering to him to see this woman who is bold and willing to live
just
this life and show who she was.
Put it all out there.
And be authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but he also believed that Cowell's level of interest would make a perfect match, in terms of the two of them. The two of them would be the perfect match because they both understood each other. They had both been through the same surgery. Mm-hmm. They had both experienced being the other sex.
Right.
I mean, it's very interesting to think about.
It is interesting.
But this remained an unrequited attachment, sadly. And it's interesting, too, because a little bit was Cowell mentions, in her book that, which, we'll get to that, too, but mentions kind of that really Dylan wanted her to be he wanted her to change, though. In order to have a relationship with her, he was it's time for you to be a woman. It's time for you to be a stay-at-home wife. It's time for you to show off how beautiful you are and go shopping.
Those weren't her interests.
Right. And she was okay, so you're supposedly in love with me and you want us to be a couple, but you want me to completely change who I am. I'm not willing to do that. So that got in the way too, obviously.
And elevating our Sheela in this moment, good for her.
I know.
Not to compromise on who she was and what she wanted out of her
exactly
female life.
Thank fucking God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a tale. It's quite a tale. But I just find it just unbelievable that then he falls in love with her and says, okay, you're a woman now. So great, no more race car driving or, no. Now you're going to like go shopping, get your hair done and stay at home and make my meals. And like, it's great. This is going to work out great. And she's like, fuck you. No. In fact, she continued. Which was really sad because it's quite an amazing story because she gave up so much to become a woman. I so admire her, but like she could still race, but she couldn't compete anymore, which was really sad. Like, no, you're a woman now, you can't compete. You can race, you can't compete. There were so many things that were taken away from her because she decided to live her authentic life. It's just fucking bullshit, So it's, I don't want to go on and on, but I hope I answered that question.
Well, I just find it fascinating that the gender, the sex role stereotypes were so ingrained that even true trans people at that time were locked into that way of thought.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was quite interesting.
It is interesting.
I'm happy to play the second clip from Roberta Howell.
Okay.
By 1954, Roberta was in need of money. So she started numerous business ventures, though many would falter. The hormones and the lavish lifestyle she enjoyed came at a cost. And this is what's sad. There was no money coming in from, like, yes, she was racing and like her ex-wife was doing. Remember we talked about that?
And
but she could dip her toe in.
Right.
This became what Roberta could be. So with no money from former motor sport winnings coming in, she couldn't compete anymore. Her businesses were collapsing around her, and the world would come to know Roberta Howell by face and name after selling her story to Picture Post magazine for a sum of which would be equivalent to $290,000 today.
Okay, I guess she was able to resolve her.
Yes.
It's a good thing she was open with her story and her life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about. Like she was just, although she was racing and doing the things she loved with no money
She
coming
couldn't
in.
make money at it
No,
anymore.
she couldn't make money. But she had all this publicity. So when they came to her and said, we'll give you $290,000, she was like, yeah, okay, that works. I'll do that. And again, I think she was eager to share her story.
Yeah, and her story is a gift and an inspiration.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's go back to Michael Dillon.
Okay, if we must.
Yes. Who she dumped.
Who she dumped, yeah.
Okay. So he found. So in the midst of all this, let me just say that of course she was in this major magazine, and what did she do when she was in this major magazine?
She outed him.
She outed him.
Oh.
She exposed Michael Dillon.
Whoa.
She praised him.
Yeah.
For helping her find who she really was and to explore becoming that.
But he didn't want to be outed.
He didn't want to be outed.
Oh, wow.
So it was quite devastating to him.
I bet.
And he had no choice in the matter.
Did he sue her?
No.
He didn't sue her?
No. Instead, he retreated from his colleagues for 10 days after the news broke, and he contemplated suicide.
Oh.
But shortly thereafter, he left Britain for India. And in the 1950s, the late 1950s, he became a Buddhist monk.
So very complicated story.
Very complicated story.
Two very complicated.
And Michael Dillon is very interesting too. I will say that.
I was going
He's
to ask
also
you
very
if you
interesting.
consider Michael Dillon a Sheela.
Well, that's an interesting question.
One of the things we look for when we're picking our Sheelas are women who have really taken risks and just sort of cracked the stereotypes. So the fact that a woman became a man and pivoted, I don't know. We'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
But if anybody has an opinion, please share it.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Do you have any questions about anything?
Yeah, I guess.
Yes.
You kind of answered it. It's Michael Julie, what you look for in a Sheela, and how do you find your Sheilas? Are you looking on the internet?
Every day somebody says, oh my God, I have somebody for you, which is amazing. Now that people know that what we're doing, I mean, I get texts, April gets texts daily. How about this one? How about this one? So I have a huge running list. Like, and I say it like crime, we're never gonna run out of content. Like, we're just not going to, which is sad, but we're never gonna run out of freaking content. It's crazy how much stuff is out there. I will also mention, I just want to give a little shout out to our editor, Sullivan, our editor.
She's got so many awesome Sheilas.
Yeah, she's just packed with the Sheila. She's always got, oh, I got a new one, I got a new one. And I think we're gonna get to Dana. We're gonna talk about being a little bit, but she's been an amazing addition to our podcast. She's a total pro, and we love her. And okay.
I wanted to know, did Roberta ever fight to compete at the level that she had competed? Like, did she ever make that a fight, or just once she changed?
She really didn't.
Okay.
I think she thought she knew she made a lot of sacrifices to become a woman, and it's sad. Like, I don't, like, for instance, she had 2 daughters. She completely cut off that relationship, and that was to her like she didn't want to shame her daughters. You know, like it's very sad. And one of her daughters continued to try to even keep in touch with her, but she was like, no. But I think that she gave up a lot and kind of just like was willing to step back because like, this is my choice to live my authentic life, to be a woman. And if that means I can't compete anymore and I can't, you know, be a parent to my child, and I can't, that's the price I have, which is very sad. And I would hope that might be different today. I think we are moving in a better direction. I still think we have a long ways to go, but you know, I would hope that would be less the case today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was wondering, and the word I'm about to use is loaded, and I don't mean it to speak, but I don't know if I have a better word for it. I'm wondering if Roberta ever in her life after her transition showed any feelings of shame, because the way you describe her is that she just seems like she's powering through all of this all the time. But it's the 1950s, England.
It's 1950s.
So I mean, it seemed like she was open from the start, right? For one thing, she wanted to keep her good name of all of her previous accomplishments. So everyone knew that the race car driver before is now Roberta. And so there was never any issue where she felt like she needed to hide it or keep it close to the chest?
Well, I will say, and this is a little bit controversial, toward the end of her life, she got a little cuckoo crazy. Like whether it was dementia, whether, I don't quite know what it is, and it's a little disappointing. But she had this like moment of like saying, oh no, I was actually, I actually was middle sex. And I had every right because I had both genders, but these people who just decide they want to be something else that they're not, you know, I don't agree with that, which is really disappointing, you know what I mean? And that part really bugged me, but I will say that I took a moment to consider it and I did a lot of research about it. I do think she was older at that time. I don't think she was mentally well at that time. And I do think that despite that, which again is disheartening, despite that, she had played such a huge role in the trans community, and that being the first one and willing to do what she did. So yes, like I think there was some shame, unfortunately, in the end, but I can't say that she was in like her most sane mind at that point. Yeah.
But in her life where she was still outwardly
Right.
public, right? I mean,
Right.
doing the magazine interview, right?
Right.
Those kinds of things didn't seem to come up. She seemed
No.
to embrace.
She seemed to embrace it at that time, and like I said, it's disheartening that later on she had this little moment, you know.
One thing that came up in the podcast, I don't think it was in this clip, you and April discuss referring to her pre-transition life using the pronouns her, and she, even though pre-transition, she was physically a male and lived in a male sport world, in a male military world. Can you just discuss how you decide to use the terms her and she historically?
Well, I didn't want it to be confusing, but at the same time, I believe, you know, Roberta Cowell was her authentic self. I don't think she was living authentically. when she was living as a man. So I just thought, with all due respect, that I would refer to her as a she from the get-go, and just make it very clear, explain the situation. Because I thought it would be more confusing to go back and forth, I thought. So I just thought we're going to start with the she, hers, and then continue, and just try to make it, because that made sense to me.
Right. And do you know, is there a particular convention in what the rules are about this right now, or is it an individual?
There's various rules, because I did a lot of research about that too. But there are varied rules. But I felt like, knowing what I know about Roberta Cowell, I think she would have been happy that I called her a she. Yeah, from the get-go.
Okay. I think we're on to our last Sheela, which actually is a group of Sheelas. They're the Night Witches.
Because these women were not only sexually harassed and belittled and not given the proper uniforms to wear, they also sort of weren't given the best planes to fly. They couldn't put parachutes in the planes. One reason was because they lacked the funds to get parachutes. And the second is...
Wait, so the parachutes went to the men, but not to the women?
Not to these women. And also because the planes were so feeble and old, they had weight limits that couldn't allow for any extra baggage. So no parachutes.
Unbelievable.
The planes were typically, they were crop duster planes from the 1920s. And they were only historically used in the military for training purposes. They were never, ever meant to see combat. The planes were mostly made of canvas and plywood. And they were only two-person planes. And they were considered mostly to be a death wish if you're going to use them in combat. Like that, was considered suicide to ride them for combat. But these were the planes that...
So they're like these two-person crop duster, very small, dilapidated planes.
Yes, that you couldn't even bail out of because you weren't allowed to take a parachute.
Wow. Well, that's a lot of commitment on their part, because I might be excited at first, but after I found out like that would be my plane, I might back out.
Well, these women did not back out. They were badasses. They were really tough. And the planes could only carry 2 bombs at a time, one under each wing, and they were on missions to bomb like up to 18, bombs a night. So the way that they did it was that they set up 40 two-person crews at night, and each would execute between 8 and 18 missions, flying back and forth to rearm in these really feeble, poor. But I'm not done talking about.
This is crazy.
No, it's crazier. This is just the beginning of crazy.
Oh my gosh, how could it get worse? I don't know.
Okay. So in order to bomb the Germans, they had to fly at very low altitudes, and in order to not be seen, they had to do it in pitch black of the night, which had the advantage of surprising the German opponents, the German enemies. So 3 planes would go out, and 2 would serve as decoy distractions. They would have flares and kind of create a spectacle. And while the Germans were going to shoot down those 2 decoy planes, the 3rd plane would fly very, very low, turn off its engine so it couldn't be heard and you're making the right sound, and then they would drop the bomb. So getting back up was always described as a finger-crossed mission, because the odds of getting that plane to just sort of regroup and work its way back up was a real finger-crossing, I hope this works kind of thing.
Okay, so the Night Witches.
Night Witches. Thanks to Dana.
This was the Russian army, and this all-female battalion, they trained in a few months to do these missions, and the reason why they were called Night Witches was because they traveled at night. They bombed the heck out of the Germans, and the Germans were so insulted that an all-female battalion was the most successful at bombing the heck out of them. They were the most effective Russian troop.
They were the most decorated.
Most decorated.
People don't even know who they are. They were more decorated than any other True, during World War II.
So they called them night witches, and the women took pride in the title. They were very, very proud.
Can you talk about the Catholic substance?
Yeah. So the Germans were convinced that these were witches and demonized, and that what was it? They were, it was something about they were cats, or I don't even remember anymore.
Oh, yeah, it was that they were like, there was something magical about them that caused them to instill such fear.
Right, magical, bad,
But it was-
wicked, yeah.
And that there was some description that the Germans gave them that was like, these must be women that are made of Catholic substance.
Yeah, they're made of a
Yeah.
cat-like substance.
Right,
Yeah.
because they were stealth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They had 9 lives.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, certainly, yes.
It's an amazing story.
Don't you want to do one for Halloween? I know I did.
For Halloween this year.
I don't remember anymore, although if you listen, I'm not sure when it's dropping, it's not live yet. But they were in Russia, and they were a volunteer army that Stalin put together with a woman who was a very famous female pilot before the war. And she went to him, and it wasn't clear to me whether Stalin asked her to form this army or she asked Stalin to have the army formed. But all of the women came from, they were widows and sisters who lost family members and wanted to do something. And so they picked the prop. I want to say they picked between 100 and 150 women. I think only 30 lost their lives over that time period. They trained for a few months when it normally would take, I want to say, 13 months or like about a year or more for these missions, and they never shied away. And their own peers, their own comrades did not support them. The men did not support them. They harassed them. They were rude. They had inferior equipment, to say the least.
So they were not turned into the military very well.
Right.
No.
And yet they took a lot of pride in what they did, and they were exceptionally effective. They were the most effective. Yeah.
They also had a real reason to do it because they were so angry.
Yeah.
They were so
Right.
Yeah. And the Germans know they were women that were bombing them.
Yeah, they somehow found out, and they took a lot of issue with it. And the plane would make that swishing sound that Missy made when the engines went off. It was like shh. And so it's like the witch's room,
The male battalions had larger, like, metal plates that had it. Like, they had a real bomber.
They had
So
real
if
planes.
they didn't hear a real plane, you
Yeah.
can tell,
Well, when I was listening to this, one of the things that it reminded me of, I don't know if you're familiar with the YPJ fighting force, the Kurdish Syrian women's forces. Apparently, when they're fighting against ISIS, they make a point to announce the presence of the women troops to let ISIS know to run. Because what happens is, if you are an ISIS fighter, according to Sharia law, you will, if you are killed in combat, you go to heaven, you can suffer conversions. If you are killed by a woman, you go to hell and you don't get any punishment. And so the Kurdish women fighters have found a way, so that when they go into battle against ISIS, they do that big high, ululating,
Right.
a terrible word for pronouncing that. So and then the ISIS fighters drop everything and they fucking run because they want their son to be the So it kind of reminded me of that, like the silent, you hear the silent whooshing, oh shit, it's the women birthday.
That's so good.
Do we know, did Stalin know how underfunded they were? Do we know, like, once this battalion or group was formed, was there any interaction back and forth with Stalin?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so. And certainly the military did know what they were allocating, and it didn't get better.
Yeah.
It didn't get better.
All right. Well, night witches. We do have one last clip. This is Jen Hitchcock. She did a guest segment, a guest podcast about Emily Nicky-Hahn.
Jen is our social media guru and a wonderful contributor.
She's also the former, she's of book show fame. A lot of you might know a book show here. I was just wearing my TV shirt the other night. Amazing store here in Highland Park. Book show that she had for how many years? 6 years.
Right
On block, that block.
Yeah.
No, wait, where are we?
First page,
Yeah,
Is that way?
Yeah, that way, right, 57.
55.
It's right, literally right there.
But,
How did you meet Jen?
okay, I just want to point this out. So, Jen, this is like 1996 when I first moved to LA, and I didn't really know anybody. I was a musician. I kind of, I moved here. I got signed to a label. I moved here. And so I used to go to, what is it called? Insomnia. It was a coffee shop on Beverly. I would go there and I would like write in my journal and drink my coffee, and hang out. And there used to be this fanzine called Z6 that got released quarterly at Insomnia. So I was so excited. I would go and read my copy of Z6, which was just freaking amazing. And I'm like, who is this person who writes this magazine? Like, who is writing Z6? This is so good. I want to be her friend. So I wrote Jen a fan letter. And I said, hey, I just moved here. I love Z6, your magazine, so much. You are so irreverent and so fucking cool. And by the way, my band is playing at Coconut Teaser on Friday night. Do you want to come? And I really want to be your friend. Okay. And Jen, do you still have my letter?
Yes.
We've done a lot. We've done a lot together, and I'm really grateful for our friendship. And so I was really excited when we started doing this podcast. So I'd be like, hey, Jen, you want to be a guest speaker on our podcast? Because she's an amazing writer. She has written for The Weekly. She has written for tons of publications. She's she's very modest, but she's very, very talented, and I love her, and I'm really delighted that she's now helping us with our podcast and helping with our Instagram, and then also contributing, which is amazing. So we're going to do one of her episodes right now.
Yeah, so this is Emily Hahn. Or Mickey.
Yeah. Mickey. Yeah, Mickey Hahn.
She left Chicago in 1922, wanted to become a geologist. She went to school at the University of Wisconsin. So when she was there, she was just getting into she wanted to be like a writer and stuff like that. But she wanted to enroll in a chemistry class. And they told her that she could not because they said no woman had ever enrolled in this chemistry class. And one professor just basically said that he didn't believe women had the minds to grasp stuff like that.
Oh, God.
So she...
Of course not.
Yeah, right? She immediately changed her major to mining engineering. So no woman had ever been, had done that major there. So she, just so she could take this chemistry class, she changed her major to
Oh,
that.
so she had to.
Yeah, yes. So
interesting.
changed her major, got a lot of course, pushback and stuff like that. One of her male friends said to her that there was no point in her studying mining engineering because nobody would hire her after.
God.
So
it's
of course,
probably true. I mean, that's the
Back in the day.
pitiful fucking truth, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God.
So of course she just was like, screw that, I'm doing it.
Right.
So she became the first woman to graduate in mining engineering from the University of Wisconsin in 1927.
Woo.
Wow.
So that was one of the,
Go Mickey.
one thing she did, right?
Right.
She also, at that time, she took a road trip in the spring of 1924 with her roommate. And at that time, roads were terrible. There were no roads, and definitely women did not travel alone on such a journey.
Wow.
So they drove from Wisconsin to New Mexico and California, bought a Model T Ford, and took this trip. They dressed as men, cut their hair short.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Had all these adventures. So during this road trip, she was a prolific letter writer. So she was always sending letters back home to her family. And it was during this trip that her brother-in-law started sending her letters to the New Yorker. And eventually, that is what got her connected with the New Yorker. She actually wrote for the New Yorker for almost 7 decades.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So sending the letters to exemplify her amazing writing.
Travels
Yes.
and-
Hey, you should know about this writer. not so much about like what she was doing, like, you know, for the New Yorker, but like this is an amazing person you should know about, right?
Yeah, all of it. Like
Okay.
her writing, her letters were just so colorful and fun, and like, of course, her adventures were, you know, she was doing these things women weren't really doing.
Okay, so the story of Emily Mickey Hahn is much bigger than that. But one of the things I remember being impressed about in the story when I listened to this episode was that Mickey knew what the rules were, and they didn't apply to her, so she found a way to circumvent. So she was still playing by the rules, meaning she couldn't take this chemistry class. Fuck it, she changes her major, so she has to do that class, right? Yeah. But also even just the road trip, right? Women in the 1920s, was it? Don't drive across America. Yeah. So she dressed like a boy, right? And I feel like there were these moments in her life where she said, okay, I see this is what the rule is, it doesn't work for me, so I'm gonna figure out a way around it. And her perseverance and her tenacity, I think it just, that was one of the things that really jumped out to me. It's like, fuck it, I'm gonna do this. And again, when she's in Africa later, right, she has, right, but how does she leaves that one night, right? Because the dude that she's with, what was the thing he wanted her to cut her hair?
Yeah, he was an anthropologist, and she wanted, how she ended up there, she wanted to spend time there. So he's like, yeah, come hang out. When she got there, he had like 3 African wives or something. And as time progressed, it seemed like he was losing it a little, right? And he was like kind of abusive towards, like, and very controlling. And so she witnessed him telling one of his wives to shave her head for some kind of punishment, you know. And so she was like, you know, taken aback, of course. But then he tried to do it to her because she just wanted a haircut. And she's like, I'm going to have one of his wives cut my hair. And he's like, no, you're not. You're going to use the clippers. She's like, I don't want to use the clippers on my hair. And so it became this thing. And that's when she's like, I'm out of here. And she like basically walked across.
But literally that night, right?
I mean, not this. I don't think it was literally that night, but probably the next day she started. Yeah.
Then I removed some of my
my
reference. I'm sorry. No, but the point was that she stood up for herself. She figured out a way to make this world work for her.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that was over and over and over.
Over and over again. She just didn't. She's like, she didn't see the word no.
Can you tell everyone about your binder? About Emily?
Initially, she was my thesis research, you know, and so, but then I never finished my thesis. But I still have, you know, I went to the Lilly Library and I dug into her letters, and so I have a huge binder of all the stuff I copied when I went to her papers, right? And what ended up happening is instead of actually doing the research I needed to do, I was like, oh my God, look at this love letter from this editor at the New Yorker. Oh, and so I ended up copying all these love letters that she received from these people. They were like very like, some of them were collage, and I mean, they were just really cool. And then her letters, you know, I copied a lot of her letters, but when I got back, I'm like, none of this really applies to, I know I need to be academic here, but there's still, I'm really happy I have. She's pretty, I mean, she published 52 books in her lifetime. She lived in Shanghai when like the war was approaching in on it, and she really liked it.
Can you talk some of the books? Like the history of the zoo, right?
Oh yeah,
it was like it ran the gamut, right? What were some of the other subjects that she wrote?
History of zoos, you know, and animal communication. She, you know, like she wrote about Africa. She wrote about China. She wrote about India. I just found a book that I've been looking for. It's angels and like, I forget what it's called. It's basically about angels and ghosts. I gave Missy a Nellie Bly book that was like an adult history book about Nellie Bly. I mean, just every subject.
And that's the thing. It's not that she wrote a lot. She wrote
diamonds.
She wrote about a lot.
Yeah.
Her interests were so cute.
Yeah, whatever she was interested in, which probably speaks to, like, I feel like you would write 52 books in your life, right? About a variety of things.
Yes.
It's that same, she went down the rabbit hole.
The rabbit hole. Yeah.
Like
I would say, like, I remember at our first podcast launch, this conversation came up kind of about like Jen actually like falling in love with Emily Hahn, like, you know what I mean? And this is what happened. She said something about it, and people didn't really react. And she said to me after, am I the only one who like falls in love with these people? Like, as I, and I said, absolutely not. Like, I know.
You fall in love with deaf people, or
You fall in love. Like, I'm in love with Nellie Bly, and I have not done Nellie Bly yet. In third grade, we were assigned, like, to do an auto by, and everybody was doing like Amelia Earhart and Bessie Ross. Not that they weren't awesome, but I chose Nellie Bly, and ever since, I'm just like, I'm absolutely, which is why Jen got me the Emily Hahn book about Nellie Bly. But let's pose that question. Does anybody else?
Anybody else? I got in love with MFK Fisher. So anybody know MFK Fisher, the writer?
Yeah, do you fall in love with these people?
I
These
mean-
women like are just like they're so amazing. Like their stories and like you live vicariously and you just kind of breathe the air they breathe. Like I don't know. I think that's
No,
very
we're the only ones.
I guess just Jen and I.
Well, wait a minute, I fall.
Okay.
I definitely fall in love, yeah.
So as many of you know, Missy is, she's a million different bands. One of her bands is a band called Breach, and there's one of my favorite songs, which is called Holiday. And it has a particular lyric in it, and I might be butchering this because this is from memory, but I was feeling like a hero because I thought I rescued you, right? This song has always hit my heart. I fucking love this song so much. But I'm wondering if that lyric, like if you are rescuing these women, when you are pulling them from history and giving them this new life, that's what it feels like to me. Am I right? Are you doing that? Is there a rescue?
Maybe I am, but I will say that in my life, I've always had this feeling that I need to rescue people. Like I think it's very important to rescue people. But I have to say, and one of the best examples of that, I mean that's a whole other story, but thank you. But for example, I visited, there was many years ago now, I don't know, 20 years ago, I visited a woman in prison through a organization called M2. It was a Christian-based organization, but I don't exactly, not exactly Christian, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. But I was like, hey, can I still do this? And they were like, sure. And so they train you to visit somebody in prison who has nobody on the outside. And they match you up with somebody who maybe you have common interests with. And then you have to go through this whole training for it. And people drop out as they're doing it because it's body-to-body contact. And you're visiting someone, you have to make a commitment to visit them, to write them letters, to be a part of their life. So I was given this woman named Monica, and she was in a hospital for the criminally insane. She was in for assault, she's in for attempted murder, and she had nobody on the outside. And I remember the first time I showed up to visit her, feeling like a hero. And there I was sitting there, and she comes out, and she is just covered in tattoos, like her whole, and she's a very, very big, statuesque woman. She comes up and she goes, "What the fuck are you doing here?" And I was like, "Hi, I'm your M2 friend. I'm your friend on the outside." There's just this very like awkward moment. Well, I will say that we became extremely close over time, and I love this woman. She touched my heart so much, and what I quickly realized was, here I thought I was rescuing somebody, but in a lot of ways she rescued me. And there were a lot of parallels in our lives, and there was a lot, and it made me such a better person to know her and to have that relationship with her and to have that experience. And so I think that through maturing a little bit, I think I still seek to kind of rescue people, but really knowing that the outcome is often that I'm also rescuing myself. It can be a little selfish in some ways. It's not just, yeah, that makes sense.
Question for you, April. Does a woman have to be lovable to be a Sheela?
No, a woman has to be remarkable to be.
That's true. Remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she can't like rock stagecoaches.
No, we actually, in our first launch, I think it was, somebody asked us about that. Would we embrace a Sheela who was just, like a Bonnie of the Bonnie and Clyde, that kind of thing. And we decided no, that we want to feature and celebrate women who do good in the world. She doesn't have to be likable. She doesn't have to be sweet. In fact, I think sometimes it's hard to be likable as a female when you're really making something happen.
It's true.
It's a lot of judgment.
That's true. That's true.
I have a question for any of the three of you, and then we can open up to the audience after I fully introduce you. What, if any, do you guys find it to be your responsibility for looking at things historically? I guess there have been a lot of Sheelas that have had a lot of men do a lot of shitty things to them, but a lot of that is the zeitgeist of that time, right? So it's in that time, it wouldn't be seen as necessarily shitty. But looking back on it, right? So how do you, when you're researching your Sheelas or when you're, thinking about any of these individual women, how do you assess that judgment on those men? Is it hard to not look at it through today's lens? Do you make a specific effort not to look at it through today's lens? Or have you thought about it?
I'm just going to say it's still so freaking relevant. And I'm working on a Sheela right now who's quite modern day. And you'll hear about her soon. But I just can't even freaking tell you. She's a woman in the film industry. And things haven't changed that much, honestly. Sadly. So, yeah.
I just wanted to add to that, our goal wasn't really to male bash either, because there are a lot of wonderful men.
Support Rose.
That's so I think that we do try to remember the time, and we do try to really give due to men who were helpful and who stepped up and made positive contributions on our shows.
Yeah.
Really, it's the patriarchy, not the men.
Right. Good point.
Right?
Very good point.
So our editor, Al, I keep owning this podcast. So Dana, I do have a couple questions for you. I'd like to know what you have, because you've edited all of these podcasts now. Are you seeing a change in their dynamic or a change in their, I don't know, what are you noticing about their relationship as you listen to these things?
I don't know that their relationship is changing necessarily. I mean, they were already very close. They were already very entwined in other projects and worked together. But I definitely see sort of a professionalism and like a little bit of it's less this sort of chatty conversation and laughter. Like the more that we do, the more detail there is about each woman and the more they've really vested in each woman. So the first couple that feels like, we weren't sure how to pronounce their name or what weird things happened or like it was like, where's that note on that? And now it's like it's just gotten more but I mean they're really invested and they want to make sure that we know the story that they know. And they're getting better at telling it.
Right. So for those of you who don't know, Dana is an editor for television, is that correct? What are some of the credits that anyone waiting worked on?
Gilmore Girls, The Doctor, Lady, Lawyer.
So Dana's done both of this work and she's an avid podcast listener, so it just made sense when these two things, her passion and her ability met. So she's working on making these ladies sound better than they would otherwise. So we can open the floor to questions now if you guys have anything. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm curious to know what is the language of SheelaNaGig? Is it Celtic? Is that a Celtic term? Or
It is. It is.
Which Celtic language do you know?
I just know, I believe it's just, from Gaelic, from Old Gaelic, and it basically...
Irish Gaelic?
Yes, Irish Gaelic, yeah. And, because I know it's a very different thing, right?
Well, I speak Welsh, which is another Celtic language.
Okay, yeah, so Irish, yeah.
And this is reminiscent of Irish Gaelic?
Yes.
And so, highly religious country, island, and quite multi-religions that don't necessarily get along, and if that's been happening for centuries, this would certainly be an environment right for prejudice like this.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Keep women in their place.
Right. Yeah. And it's sad that so many of the Sheilas have been destroyed, throughout the. And it's interesting, a lot of my friends now that know what a SheelaNaGig is, my friend's I've been to Ireland 3 times and she went there recently. She's I saw some of that. I've never noticed them before. They are there. You are right, But until you know about them and know to look for them, eventually we're going to do an episode when we go, we find all the SheelaNaGigs in Ireland.
Were they primarily in Ireland or were they photographer?
Yes, please. Yes. Right, yes.
Were they primarily in Ireland or did you?
Primarily in Ireland, but also in France, also in Spain.
That's fine, I'll go there too.
Yeah. Most in Ireland, yeah. And like I said, there's about between 100 and 150 left in Ireland at this point, but it's sad because there were a lot.
Are they protected?
Yes, they do protect themselves.
Any other questions?
Where does the podcast air?
Ooh, we're getting to that. But yeah, go ahead and answer it now.
No. Well, it airs. You can go to our website, which is the SheelaNaGigPodcast.com. But we are also we are currently on SoundCloud
And YouTube.
and YouTube.
And that's
You're-
in the program?
Yeah, we're adding Spotify. We're adding Audible. We're adding as we go here. So hopefully by the end of this month, we will be on Spotify. We will be on Audible. We'll be on iHeartRadio. So we're just kind of adding as we go. But yes, so the easiest way right now is to go to either Instagram or to our website, and then you can click and watch the episodes. And another one's being episode number 5 is
being dropped.
And let me just I have a little exciting news, which is kind of like a new thing. We're doing Halloween episodes. So those are going to be released. Our Halloween episodes are coming out. We're very excited about our Halloween episodes. So listen. About our Halloween Sheilas. Yes.
Do you name the episodes or just give them the name of the guest?
Oh, no, we named them.
Okay, that was.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, that's a.
April has a lot of it. That's her department. That's her department. Yes.
If there aren't any other questions, I would just say, for those of you who've come in late, make sure you get a goodie bag because that has all of your information, right?
please.
Make sure you get some raffle and a raffle ticket. And if you have Sheilas, please contact them. Let them know.
Let us know.
Sheela Na Gig, unabashed in your